I live in a small town in central Alabama, and on nearly all sides, my town is surrounded by a forest. Growing up, I never thought anything of the forest. Many kids would play in it. We would get our hands on BB guns and play war games. Some of my friends and I would build forts out there. Nothing about it ever scared me. That was until someone went missing. I was in 9th grade when it happened. The kid that went missing was in the 6th grade. My town has a population of around 1,200, so there weren't many suspects that the police could go off of. The days of searching turned up nothing. After the 5th day, the search was called off, and the boy was declared dead. It was our little town's tragedy. For the next couple of years, no one allowed their kids into the forest for obvious reasons. Every year, there would be a ceremony to remember the kid, and all schools would let out early that day. Once again, however, more people went missing during a hunting trip. I was the only survivor. It was the end of my senior year, and to celebrate, my dad wanted to take me on a hunting trip. I was never really big into hunting like he was, but I decided to tag along, since I didn't spend too much time with my dad. He brought along 2 of his buddies, Randy, who was around 5'10", and had shaggy brown hair, and Hector, who was 6'1", slightly chubby, and had balding blonde hair. I hadn't really interacted with them before the trip, so it was a little awkward at first. My dad said we would be in the woods for a good long time. He had planned for us to go early in the morning and come back late at night. He told me to pack whatever drinks and snacks that I wanted. I only brought water for my drink because I didn't want to get dehydrated. As for snacks, I brought the classics: Little Debbie's, chips, etc. I was given a .300 Winchester Magnum for my rifle. I had shotguns before, so I wasn't worried about misfiring or missing my target. The day we were going, I was woken up at like 4 a.m. by Hector. He told me that my dad and Randy were just about ready. I got up, and I put the clothes that I had picked out for that day on. When I went out to the kitchen, I grabbed an iced coffee out of the fridge. I saw my dad and his 2 friends were outside smoking. I could hear them loudly laughing and talking about the good old times. I got my things ready, and after only a couple of minutes of being awake, I stepped outside with my bag over one arm and my rifle over the other. "Hey there, buddy, you ready to go?" my dad asked, tossing his cigarette on the walkway and grinding it with his shoe. Sure am. I got everything that I need." At the time, I was excited just to hang out with the grown-ups and see what my dad got up to. We made our way to my dad's truck, where Randy and Hector decided to ride in the bed instead of using their own cars. I sat up front next to my dad, who was starting the truck when I climbed in. It was just barely starting to get to dawn. The sky still that deep early morning blue. The temperature was around 70. The high that day would be 87. Not too bad. As we drove to the hunting grounds, Hector and Randy got tossed around in the back because the roads in town were not that well maintained. "So, how do you feel going on this trip with your old man and my fellow dummies back there?" He gave a hearty chuckle. "I'm pretty excited. I'm glad you brought them along. They seem nice enough." "Yeah, I figured it would be kind of boring just the 2 of us. And hey, you hadn't really talked to them up to this point. So, why not, you know?" The drive was about 10 minutes. Along the way, me and my dad had a nice chat just about life and everything that had been going on in each other's lives. Meanwhile, Randy and Hector were arguing about who would miss shots more often, and it kind of got heated. And my dad slammed on the brakes, which tossed them both into the cab. My dad busted out laughing when he did this. The way he laughed made it seem like it was the funniest thing in the world. Randy and Hector didn't share the same amusement. We made it to the hunting grounds and another truck was already there. It had a thin layer of dirt over it, which anything around my town got if you didn't clean it regularly. We got out and grabbed our things before making our way down the trail. My dad commented about some good spots to start with, before we went deeper into the forest. We set up at a spot about a half-mile down the trail. Hector immediately, upon sitting down, pulled a beer out of his bag. He tossed one to me and to Randy. I instinctively caught it, but then realized that I shouldn't have it and I tried to hand it back. "Oh, come on now, you can drink that. You're an adult now," Hector said. "I just don't really like alcohol, but thank you for the offer." He shrugged and took it back. Randy accepted the offer of free alcohol and began to drink his rapidly. My dad got my attention quietly and pointed out towards a hill in the distance. It was hard to make out what exactly he was pointing at in the early morning light, but I was sure that it was a deer. "You ready to see the first one of the day, guys?" He got everyone's attention to try and show off how good of a shot he was. However, right when he was about to pull the trigger, Randy slapped him in the back of the head. This caused him to miss aim and completely miss the deer, which ran away. Randy cackled like a madman afterwards, exclaiming about how it was payback for earlier. I'll admit, it got a chuckle out of me as well. We waited at that spot for a couple more minutes before moving on. When we got to the next spot, I thought I saw someone off in the woods, away from any trail. I pointed it out to my dad, who thought that the person must be an idiot. Going off of the trails was a good way to get shot. Whoever it was seemed just slightly taller than the average person, but this wasn't really enough to make me nervous or anything like that. As everyone was setting up, the person slinked into a thicker area of trees and was gone from sight. I didn't think much of it. By this point in the trip, enough time had passed that the sun was now above the horizon, and the lighting was much better. I managed to hit a deer, killing it. Everybody seemed happy that I was able to do it on my first try, but like I said, I wasn't that big at hunting, so I wasn't terribly excited. The morning passed peacefully. Every now and then, I would catch glimpses of that dude moving throughout the trees. I never could get a good look at him because of how far away he was. It never crossed my mind that he might be following us. Another thing that never crossed my mind is that we never heard anyone else shooting, despite the fact that someone's truck was in the parking area. The day was fairly uneventful. We did the usual hunting things, like killing deer, comparing accuracies, and what have you. By around evening, I would say we were about 6 or 7 miles into the hunting trail, and I was starting to get tired. I carried on, however, because I was having fun. We made it to the next spot, and when we got set up, we smelled rot. Now, this didn't really catch our attention because it's a hunting trail. Hector decided to look for the source of the rot. He said he wanted to move it away because it was smelling foul. He wandered off towards where he believed it was coming from, and we paid a little attention to where he was actually going. He never came back. After about 30 minutes of his absence, Randy noticed that he still hadn't returned, and that rot smell was still present. When we were alerted to this fact, we started to look for him, calling his name and leaving the trail. After a while of searching and walking around, we too were lost. We couldn't remember which direction the trail was in. This resulted in an argument, which I was forced to break up, because it was the least productive thing we could be doing at that moment. When they stopped, my dad had the idea to try and listen for footsteps and follow whatever direction they were coming from. We all sat silent, and a realization made my stomach sink. There was no noise at all. No wind, no rustling leaves, no birds sighing, nothing. It was dead still and silent. I looked at the sky to see if there was an oncoming storm, but it was totally clear. We did hear footsteps after a couple of silent seconds. They were coming from a thicker part of the forest. By this point, it was becoming increasingly dark, so Randy pulled out a flashlight and he turned it on. We made our way into the thicker part of the forest. We stayed together so no one else would get lost. While looking around, I bumped into something wet. I was stunned, thinking that it had to be tree sap. But when I heard Randy scream, I was plunged into fear. I slowly turned to look at what I had bumped into. When I laid my eyes upon it, I proceeded to puke up the cheap snacks that I'd eaten earlier. It was human skin, strung up between two trees. Based on the flensed face, I could tell that it was once Hector. My mind was flooded with thoughts. My dad told us that we needed to get out of the forest now. My dad reasoned where to go, based on the direction that the sun had set. Randy and I followed him out of a desperation, not having any better ideas ourselves. We were moving swiftly through the trees, trying to get out as fast as possible. Occasionally, a branch would snag my clothes or hit me in the face. I heard Randy scream from behind me, and when I turned around, something that was around 8 feet tall had picked him up, and it was taking him away. My dad pulled out his rifle and opened fire. The noise this thing made, it still haunts me to this day, and I keep having nightmares about it. It was a mixture between several different animals screaming. When it turned around, I was able to get a good look at it. It had one eye in the center of its head, and that was the only thing it had on its face. As for its proportions, its arm seemed longer than its body, although it was way slouched over. The texture of its skin was oily, and it was a dark gray color. It rushed towards my dad at a blinding speed, and it ripped him apart right in front of me. It had dropped Randy, who was now unconscious. I turned out my flashlight, and I stood as still as I could, as quietly as I could. I heard it walk over to where it had dropped Randy. It picked him up again, and it stomped its way off deeper into the forest. After what felt like an eternity standing there, I slowly moved over to my dad's body, and I grabbed the truck keys off his belt. I went in the direction that he had suggested, slowly and carefully. He was right. I came out of the forest a couple feet away from my dad's truck. I sprinted over to it, and I fumbled with the keys until I could unlock it. I left the town. A couple towns over, the police had caught up to me because I was the primary suspect. However, after discovering the bodies in the shape that they were in, I was let go. They were under the impression that no human was capable of doing that. I left Alabama altogether. I live in Illinois now. To this day, I still wonder if that thing is still out there, preying on hunters unfortunate enough to get lost in the forest. For the sake of everyone, I desperately hope not.